All right. Well, I've got 7:01 on my phone, so we're going to get started. Welcome everyone to, I think, our seventh monthly webinar of the year for DeKalb Democrats. My name is Michael Greenwald. I am third vice chair of DeKalb Dems and thrilled to have an amazing panel tonight to talk about a very important topic, and that is voting. It's an enormous topic, honestly, and probably too much that we could possibly cover and do justice in 1 hour. But we're going to do our best to cover a lot of ground. So I want to just share with you some of the game plan for this coming hour and then get started. We have an amazing panel of brilliant, experienced, talented people who I'm going to introduce in about 10 minutes. But first, I'm going to share with you some information to kind of whet your appetite to get the discussion started. We're going to welcome your questions, and we want you to put them in the Q&A section of your Zoom bar. And that way we'll know that your questions are there. That's what I'll be looking for them and make sure that they're answered at some point, if not during our webinar, then by the end of it. So where do we begin? There are so many things to talk about. We've got issues with voter ID requirements, voter registration, concerns about intimidation at the polls, the crazy things that happen at the state election board, gerrymandering, duopoly. If you don't know what that is, you're going to hear about it tonight. Voter apathy, the dilemma of paper versus computer ballots. So many things that we possibly can talk about, but we can't probably cover all of it. There are so many things that are important. Here are some of the things that are on our menu tonight. We're going to talk about voter participation. We're going to talk about recent voting legislation, voter registration trends, redistricting and gerrymandering, and ranked choice voting. So just to lay the groundwork for that, I'm going to share some information about these things, and then we're going to jump in with our guest panelists. Voter participation in the U.S. Has never been great, although in recent years it has done better. The graph on the left shows where the United States compares to some, but not all, of Western democracies. We actually have dozens of countries that do better than us, but you get an idea. But we did have a pretty good showing the last two cycles. In 2020, we had the highest turnout since 1908. And 2024 was second best and the highest one since 1960s. And we've also seen similar things during the midterms. We're seeing an uptick in the last two cycles, probably for reasons we all can imagine. And that's the good news. We also saw that in Georgia in particular, we had impressive turnout compared to fellow states. Our turnout in Georgia beat the national average in 2024. We had lots of early in-person voting. Absentee ballots decreased after COVID to just 5% of the votes. We did see some trends that were concerning. The turnout gap, the racial turnout gap expanded by 3%, meaning that the gap between black and white voters, the voter turnout actually increased for both groups, but as a percentage of population, it fell, with a decline most evident in younger black men, which we need to pay attention to and figure out what our challenges are. In addition, we see continuation of older voters being very reliable and more so than the younger voters in terms of turnout, another area for us to be mindful of, and it's a national trend. In Georgia, women's participation is much higher than men, 56% of all votes, and the gender gap is most pronounced among black voters. And then, of course, over the past summer, we were aware that nearly 500,000 voters, registered voters, were flagged for removal if they did not vote in the last two cycles, 22 and 24. This disproportionately impacts people of color, low-income voters, and younger voters. Legislative actions in Georgia. We've seen a number of efforts to change how we conduct business at the ballot box. Changes impacted unhoused voters. Senate Bill 189, requiring those who didn't have a permanent mail address to receive all of their election-related material at the county registrar's office. Also, Senate Bill 212 addressed some things regarding who can serve as election superintendents and establish new election boards. There are a number of bills that tried but failed, although they may come back. House Bill 397 would have removed Georgia from ERIC, expanded the state election board's powers, restricted absentee voting options. Senate Bill 175 would have prevented ranked choice voting. Senate Bill 214 would have authorized in-person absentee voting at poll elections at election day. And there have been some legal challenges as well to know about. That in June of this year, the Supreme Court rejected 7 proposed rule changes from the election board, including mandating efforts to mandate hand counting ballots, stricter ID requirements. In September of last year, the ACLU and other groups filed challenges to some provisions of Senate Bill 189, saying that it would encourage baseless challenges to voter eligibility. We also have an ongoing committee going on. The House Blue Ribbon Study Committee on Election Procedures has commenced with two meetings so far. Its purpose is to evaluate our policies and procedures and make recommendations for new laws. We've had a meeting in July and September looking at things ranging from election superintendents, equipment, structures, and getting input from other states. Trying to get input from other stakeholders regarding voter registration, early voting, absentee voting, the chain of custody for ballots, poll worker training, all in the context of a number of things going on, including the attention to QR codes on the ballots, altering procedures for voters to file eligibility challenges, and restricting, again, where homeless voters can cast their votes. All of these will be packaged in a way that allows them to make recommendations during this coming legislative session. And then at the federal level, the SAVE Act was passed by the House in April of 25. It had a number of features, including most notably requiring states to mandate proof of citizenship, specifically your birth certificate or a passport. Currently, in many states, you can prove your citizenship simply by swearing to it under penalty of perjury. Also eliminating registration via online and mail-in approaches, gutting automatic registration such as DMV, which was a big source of our success in registering a lot of voters in the past. Requiring states to take steps to ensure that only U.S. citizens are on the voter rolls, and penalizing those officials who fail to do that or fail to require those checks. And then finally, to give private citizens the right to sue election officials for not enforcing the law. So lots of potential impact from the SAVE Act, most notably that married women and those with changed names, amounting to nearly 70 million people, may not have a birth certificate that matches their current legal name, which would be disastrous across the country. Low-income voters also, and those without passports, would be severely disadvantaged. College students face hurdles with residency issues. Rural voters have a harder time getting to election offices to register in person, depending on their county. Seniors may have challenges, and those who have recently survived natural disasters may not have important records to be able to demonstrate that they are in fact citizens and should be able to vote. And finally, tribal citizens do not always include the place of birth on their records. It's estimated by one study reported in the AJC that up to 10% of Georgians would have trouble showing documentation of citizenship, even though they're eligible to vote. Number 3, voter registration. We have seen that Republicans have had some momentum in registration, and our lead seems to be shrinking. We have lost ground in many states, key among them Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and in Florida, we actually flipped. So our lead shrunk in Pennsylvania and North Carolina, but in Florida, they actually now have the registration advantage. They've done really an impressive job, and we are behind now. We're also seeing that more and more independents are occupying a segment of voters where it is noted. We're seeing that Republicans adding more younger voters, specifically in some states like Nevada, that the Democratic Party's share of registration of Latino voters is declining as well. It should be noted that we don't always know where people stand, because in states like Georgia, we don't ask this question about whether or not they are going to be a Democrat or a Republican. So party affiliation is an important part to understand. There's a broader measure by which they probably will vote. And according to a Gallup poll recently, the Democrats still retain a slight advantage in party affiliation as recently as the second quarter of 2025, 46% Democrat or leaning Democrat versus 43% Republican or leaning Republican. Looking at a national map of voter registration, you can see that there is wide disparity in the percentage of voter registration, and now Georgia is below average. We have some states in the darker color purple, like Minnesota actually leads the country in it. But also, even in Mississippi, they're doing a better job, in Oregon and Virginia and Kentucky doing a better job than we are. So a huge range and disparity in what percentage of people are voted that are eligible to vote. How are Democrats doing in Georgia? Well, again, we don't know because the registration doesn't ask if you are Democrat or Republican, but we have some information. The AJC reported this study of people who have moved to Georgia and found that when you look at their declaration of their party affiliation, that Democrats seem to have an edge. Since 2020, more than 18,000 Democrats have moved to the state, more than Republicans, for a net gain of 13,500. You can see how it breaks down per state. Our biggest influx is from Florida, followed by California, New York, and North Carolina, with an edge in most of those to us. Now, this discussion wouldn't be complete without talking about gerrymandering. We have much to worry about in that regard as well. We have seen concerns throughout the country about gerrymandering, and right now we know of these states that are in the process of doing it. You've all heard about Texas already approving it. California is going to be putting it on the ballot, but we also have Florida and Illinois and Indiana and New York and New Jersey and Maryland. And possibly more. So a lot of mid-cycle gerrymandering instigated this summer by Trump's call for more Republican safe seats. And then last but not least, where's ranked choice voting? Ranked choice voting has become an increasingly common part of the conversation, and certainly in my circles. And we are seeing that there are increasing number of examples throughout the country as well as the world that use ranked choice voting. 37 cities or more use it for U.S. elections. 2 states, Maine and Alaska, do it entirely. 5 states use it for Democratic primaries: Alaska, Hawaii, Kansas, Nevada, and Wyoming. So we see it at various levels and used in different ways. It's not all the exact same way. What about Georgia? Well, it's interesting. We are not supposed to use ranked choice voting, but we do. We do it for those who are in the military and vote for overseas, who are living overseas. So Georgia is one of 7 states that do it that way. We have had bills proposed to ban ranked choice voting. There was a bill a few years ago sponsored by Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones, Senate Bill 355, and that was basically copied into Senate Bill 175 that did not make it through. Athens, Clark County passed a resolution a year ago supporting it, but they are not allowed by state law to have a form of voting. There's an ongoing debate. The proponents, and we're going to hear from them today, argued that it would save taxpayers a lot of money and lower turnout runoff elections. Opponents claim that it's confusing and would cause voter fatigue. Now we'll see what we have to say about that. So that, I think, is all I have to share with you all right now. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and get to the good part, which is introducing this amazing panel. So we have with us 4 really talented, gifted people in this arena. I want to introduce them to you, and then we're going to get started with questions. First up, Charlie Bailey. Charlie Bailey is a lifelong Democrat and seasoned political strategist. He spent decades organizing, advising, and fundraising for campaigns across the state. His political journey began with Young Democrats at UGA, Go Dogs, Beat Bama. His political journey eventually led to senior roles in congressional and gubernatorial campaigns, and as a Democratic nominee for Attorney General in 2018 and Lieutenant Governor in 22, he raised millions in grassroots support while advancing bold people first policies. In addition to his political leadership, Charlie is a former Fulton County prosecutor and civil rights attorney. He prosecuted violent crime as part of his gang and organized crime unit, and later held corporations and public institutions accountable through his legal advocacy. In 2024, he represented 5 local election officials pro bono to challenge last-minute rule changes that threatened to undermine the democratic process. He's a native of Harris County, and he remains deeply committed to justice, rural communities, and strengthening democratic power in every corner of Georgia. Chairman Bailey, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Next, we have Representative Saira Draper. Saira is a trial attorney, a voting rights expert, and the state representative for House District 90 in Atlanta and DeKalb. She is the chief deputy whip of the Georgia House Democratic Caucus. Her career has traversed the private, public, and nonprofit sectors. In 2020, she ran the voter protection effort for the Democratic Party of Georgia, leading a team of over 12,000 volunteers who were instrumental in Biden's win in Georgia, as well as Senators Ossoff and Warnock's victories in the 21 runoffs. In her law practice, she represents victims of medical malpractice and catastrophic injury, and as a state legislator, she's a leading voice in democracy and election space. Saira lives in Candler Park and can be found strolling the Beltline on weekends with her three young children. Representative Draper, thank you so much for joining us. Next up, we have Ken Lawler. Ken is a chair of the board of Fair Districts Georgia Foundation. Since joining Fair Districts in 2019, he has led efforts in research to the extent of gerrymandering in Georgia by both political parties over the last 3 decades. He's been instrumental in driving a data-driven approach to redistricting. This includes establishing a partnership with the Princeton Gerrymandering Project to bring state-of-the-art statistical methods to Georgia, supporting the creation of fair maps. He has also advocated for redistricting reform directly with members of the Georgia General Assembly and members of our congressional delegation. As chair of the foundation, he is leading efforts to research solutions and educate the public about gerrymandering, looking forward to having reforms in place before the 2030 census. He started his involvement in political causes following a 39 career as an IBM consultant and executive. Ken, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
And last but not least, Daniel Baggerman is an Atlanta native and currently serves as the president of Better Ballot Georgia. And he's been involved as a volunteer with that group since its founding in 2020. Better Ballot Georgia is a nonpartisan grassroots organization advancing ranked choice voting in Georgia. Daniel, thank you so much for being here. All right. So I'm going to start off with some questions. Please note that two of our panelists, Ken Lawler and Daniel Baggerman, represent nonpartisan organizations. Panelists are encouraged to jump in whenever they have something to offer. For those in the audience, please type your questions in the Q&A, and we will get to them. And a recording of this webinar will be available on the DeKalb Dems YouTube channel following this broadcast. All right. So I'm going to kick it off for questions for Charlie Bailey about the voter purging over the summer. I know that the Democratic Party of Georgia worked really hard to try to notify those folks and to salvage those legitimate voters where they could. I wondered if you could give us a sense of how we did.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, when we found out that these voter purges were going into place, our voter protection department, which I'll say is the best in the country of any state party, and y'all should be proud, led by Cecilia Baldwin. Our team got going, got volunteers lined up. Since mid-July, we have made over 140,000 phone calls. We took that list or that number that you've probably seen, almost 500,000. We took out the people that were removed for good cause, meaning through the ERIC system, which is a good system to be a part of, because they had actually moved. Reduced that number and then took the likely Democratic voters out of that, which was about 140,000. We've made 140,000 calls. We had conversations with 2,276 voters. And of that group, about a quarter of them were still residents or told us they were still residents. So a big chunk of them, a little over half, actually, they didn't live in Georgia anymore, which, of course, they don't need to be on our rolls if they don't live in Georgia anymore. And then there's some people that wouldn't say one way or the other. But of the ones that were still residents, we got almost 300 of those people to commit to re-registering because they were still in Georgia. They wanted to be registered, to commit to re-registering to vote, and we got them the materials to do so. So, one thing to keep in mind, as I said at the top, the number isn't as big as 500,000. The most of that number were removed for the regular kind of maintenance. And of that remaining is in that use it or lose it category, where the Republicans, it is state law. They have deigned to say when someone, how frequently they should be voting. If they're not frequently enough, then they get to remove them, which we oppose. that policy. But we were able to reach out to all those, and another, again, good factor is a good chunk of those people, even that we reached out to, they're not in Georgia anymore. So the overall impact of this might not be quite as big as some of the headlines said, but we're going to keep fighting to make sure every single one of those people, that's why we contacted 140,000, could get back re-registered.
Yeah. And with races in the future likely to be so close, every single one of these counts so much. I mean, it's all about these margins. Yeah.
That's right.
So I got a question for you about registration. So there are concerns about Republicans outplaying us in registration throughout the country. So I've heard you say several times that we're not going to take this lying down. The Democratic Party of Georgia is going to have a robust response to that. Um, how can we do that? What's the plan? How are we approaching that issue?
So on the registration front, one, the fact that we don't have party registration here in Georgia puts us in a different kind of place than, say, in North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Florida. I've had conversations with state chairs that this has to be a big part of what they do, because they've got to get their folks registered, and need to get them registered in a partisan way. Of course, we can't do that here. You don't register by party. I think it's also important to note that we do still have on the books automatic voter registration through DDS, through driver services, which is an opt out. You're going to get, anytime you contact driver services, you're going to get registered unless you opt out of it. What that has done is move our voter registration from, in 2016, when that went, before it went into effect, like 78%. It actually moved to, it got up to 98% in 2020, came back down to 92%. Mike, I did see the stat that you cited, and we're going to check on that. I'm not sure it's that low. I'm not sure it's back down to 70. That would be an enormous drop off what we've seen, but I'm going to have my team check on that. The good thing is that this automatic voter registration does a lot of the work for us. A lot of our work is in persuading people that they got something to come vote for. There are good organizations like League of Women Voters and other, partners in the nonprofit space that are doing voter registration, but it is not the impending big thing that our brothers and sisters in Florida and North Carolina have to deal with. We do have a better situation than others on that front. And it is also important to note, if you want to do voter registration in Georgia, there are a lot of laws tied up in it. That they have made this as hard as they can, and you need to be consulting with an attorney before you do it, because there's criminal penalties. There's all along the way, they have put in these specific requirements that can trip people up. So it is best left to organizations that are built out and have like a lot of people really well trained to do it, so that you don't give these Republican investigators any reason to come after you. And that's a change that has really taken place over the last 4 or 5 years to criminalize certain parts of voter registration. But the good thing is we are in a much better position than some other parties on voter registration.
I got a question here. I'm concerned about the young voters who get their driver's license at 16 and aren't registered to vote. I'm wondering if there's a plan to address this population.
Yep. As of 2024, we had the second highest rate of 18-year-olds registered to vote. The highest was Michigan. They're like super high. They're like 70% or something. Ours was like 46%, and we were second highest in the country. But there is what we do need to do, and what we are going to do is check with our partners and see how they are addressing the holes that do exist in our voter registration. But as of right now, we do a pretty good job. There is a system where high schools can appoint deputy registrars to register high school students. That's one reason we are higher than every other state than Michigan when it comes to 18-year-olds. But 46% ain't as high as it could be. And there's slack there. And if we can figure out, I'm not going to sit here and tell you we have a silver bullet to do it. But if we can get that up into the 50s, again, that can be the difference of winning and losing. So I don't have a grand strategy to tell you right now, but we are going to be working on exactly that. And how can we get from second best in the country, closer to Michigan?
Right.
I'll just add that the DeKalb School Board is very aware of this issue, and they have a lot of initiatives to get their young students who are turning voting age to register and then also to vote during early voting. I don't know if APS has anything similar, but the DeKalb School Board certainly does.
All right. Thank you. Well, Representative Draper, I have some questions for you as well about legislation. I think maybe we'll turn to that for a few moments. Wondering what your sense is about going into the next session. What bills do you expect to get consideration? What bills do you think would be most concerning or promising coming up ahead?
So it's tough for me to talk about legislation without talking about the study committee that I'm a part of right now. We have an election administration study committee. There's maybe 7 or 8 of us on this election study committee, and we're traveling all around the state holding hearings. And the idea is that at the end of this tour, we will write a report with recommendations for legislation for the next session. So we haven't started writing that report, at least as far as I know. We haven't started writing that report. I don't know if some of my colleagues have, but it is a little bit spaghetti on the wall as far as the topics that we have been discussing at the study committee. I mean, I do wish there had been a more defined scope of interest as we pursue these discussions around the state, but we have been tackling a lot of different topics. And so right now, anything is fair game as to what gets into that report and what we see in session next year. I can tell you that some of the things I am most concerned about seeing have to do with our voter list maintenance. So there's this bill that you mentioned, HB 397, I believe, that would take us out of the ERIC system. We've mentioned ERIC a couple times, and I'm sure most people on this call are familiar with the ERIC system, but it's basically a list maintenance compact that we have with other states. We get to know when Georgians are moving to other states, and they tell us when their people from their states are moving to Georgia, and that way we can compare rolls and see where people are located. That has been a high quality tool for keeping our voter rolls clean. So if we were to get out of that compact, that would make our voter rolls less clean. And that is something I fear we might see given the amount of discussion that we have had about it during this study committee. The other thing is something that Charlie just touched on, which is our automatic voter registration opt-out system. There has been some discussion about changing it to an opt-in system. And you might think it doesn't make a lot of difference whether it's opt-out or opt-in, but we know for a fact that it makes a massive difference because in 2021, DDS made a mistake on their website where they changed the system from opt-out to opt-in. And we saw a precipitous decline in voter registrations during the several months, almost a year, while that toggle was the wrong way on the DDS website. So we know for a fact that if we go from opt-out to opt-in, we will see a decline in registrations. And despite the fact that we have that knowledge, there have been proposals made to change us from an automatic voter registration to an opt-in voter registration system. So those are 2 that I'm keeping my eye on that I do not want to see next session. The last but not least, we will have to make a proposal about what to do with the QR codes. Because right now there is a requirement. We passed legislation last year that said by July of 2026, we had to do away with QR codes on our ballots. And so one of the additional issues that we're discussing in this study committee is, okay, well, if we get rid of these QR codes, what do we go to next? So those are 3 that are on the horizon, I think.
So I'm curious about your thoughts about the push for paper ballots. Going back to paper ballots, no more computer involved. The thought that any computer could be hacked. What are your thoughts? What are the thoughts of your colleagues? If you know that, does the Democratic caucus have some sense about our approach? It seems like it's an issue championed more by Republicans.
You throwing me a softball there, Mike. So yeah, this is definitely a controversial, or has, can be a controversial issue. This is my view on it. I mean, there are folks that believe very strongly that the machines that we have are hackable and they pose a security risk. And then on the other hand, there's considerations about what would happen if we go to an all paper ballot system. And when we say a paper ballot system, what do we mean? Do we mean just filling out that paper ballot and then counting things by hand? Or is it a combination of filling out a paper ballot and then having them machine counted? So there's, different definitions within what we mean by hand, paper ballots. Our Secretary of State would probably argue that what we have right now is a paper ballot system, right? Because you actually, even though you use the ballot marking device, you do get a piece of paper that leaves for an audit trail. So there's a lot of different definitions and variations all in between. But here is what I'm looking at big picture. We have 159 counties in Georgia. And I want to know that if we were to move to some type of paper ballot system, that is a system that can work for every county from Harris County to Fulton County. There's been discussion about pushing a pilot in November of this year, going to a hand mark system as a pilot this year. I'm not necessarily against that idea, but what I have not heard yet is from our very big counties of whether that's even possible for them to do by November of this year. And if they were successful in November of this year, whether they would be able to make the leap from a small election this November to a massive election in 2026. Because what we don't want is a new system where there are massive lines in large counties because we haven't worked out the kinks. When I think about a hand-marked paper ballot system, what I want to know is that we would have all the variations of ballots at every precinct or every polling place. So let me give you an example. So right now during early voting, you can go to any location in DeKalb County, right? And you could live in Stone Mountain, you could live in City of Atlanta, DeKalb, but you can go to any single location in DeKalb County and you can vote your ballot at that location. And we can do that right now because we have the machines. Would we be able to do that if we had paper ballots? Does that mean that they have to have enough of every single type of ballot on site? And what are the security risks that that poses if you have hundreds of every single type of ballot on site? Alternatively, there's possibly printing devices that people can use to print out a ballot as you come in, and it would print out your specific ballot. But does that equipment exist? And do we have the resources behind purchasing that equipment so that there are enough that, we need a lot more in DeKalb County than you need in Harris County? So what I don't want to do is put Democrats at a disadvantage, because the needs of big counties are very different than the needs of small counties. And those are just some of the considerations I'm weighing as we're hearing from folks and taking it all in.
If I could just make a comment on that,
Please.
just this is Ken. I'm going to take my Fair Districts hat off for a second and go back to my world when I was an IBM technology consultant. Okay, um, a couple things, just these comments. To me, the ERIC system is just common sense. It's a way to share information between states. I absolutely applaud Secretary Raffensperger for standing up for that system. It's just a common sense way to clean up the voting rolls in a way that makes sense. This fear of QR codes to me just seems to be fear of technology for fear's sake. It doesn't make sense to me. I mean, you have to be able to trust that the QR code is representing your choice. You got to trust the machine at some point. And hand marked paper ballots to me is as a process engineer, it's crazy. If I have an election in which 5 million voters are making choices, and then let's say that there's 20 choices on every ballot in a presidential election, that's 100 million ballot marks that have to be correctly marked. The error rate on that is going to be a heck of a lot higher than a pushing button on the machine. As an engineer, forget this is not a fair district's position. This is Ken Lawler's personal experience as a tech guy. It does not make sense that you're not going to make more mistakes with 100 million ballot marks than you would with a machine. I just don't get it. So I'm going to get off that soapbox and go back to fair districts. But as a technology guy, it drives me nuts to see that.
Well, while we're at it, why don't you go ahead with fair districts? If you want to take a moment to explain what fair districts is, that would be great. And I know that people are going to be interested to know about the current state of gerrymandering throughout the country, but also here in Georgia. My question to you is, how much does the design of our map affect the outcome of elections in Georgia?
Well, to answer your question, the design of the map makes a huge difference in the outcome of the election. And we can talk about the studies that we've done on that. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step over Representative Draper's space there. I didn't mean to take off the end of her conversation. If she had more to say, please weigh in. But Fair Districts Georgia, we are a nonpartisan nonprofit organization. Our sole mission is to try to reform redistricting in the state of Georgia through education, research. We advocate down at the legislature for changes. Really, that's our only mission. But I'll say this, I'll say that we think that fair districts are really all part of the thing that everybody wants, which is free, fair, and secure elections. That's what everybody wants, right? Free, fair, and secure elections. All the things we've been talking about, all the bills you talk about, are all about the conduct of elections, whether it's registration, voting, drop boxes, paper ballots. Those all have to do with how the election is conducted. And you can have the fairest conduct of an election ever. But if the map that you're voting on has rigged the election already, what do you have? So to us, fair maps and fair conduct of elections are two sides of the same coin when you talk about free and fair elections, right? So we are very concerned about the design of the maps. That's really the part that we worry about, how the maps are designed. The story in Georgia, and we've looked back at the last several elections, is that the design of the map makes a huge difference. The reason is that gerrymandering, and we've had a lot of gerrymandering in Georgia for years, going way back to the early 2000s, right? The map sets aside way too many safe seats for each party. If you look at the election, let's say in the last maps that were drawn, the map sets aside enough safe seats for one party to win. That's how it works, right? So we've only hit in the last. I'm just going to pop in one little graphic if I could to illustrate this point. I'm going to just bring up one quick thing here. Um, this particular page shows the state house the state house map here, right? Um, the graphic on the upper left is the design of the map. The map is designed for this is the 2023 map that was done as a result of the court order, and this is what we all voted on in 2024. There were 94 safe Republican seats, 79 safe Democratic seats, about seven competitive. On the right-hand side, what you can see is that the election turned out to be pretty close to that number. The state senate actually matches exactly. But basically it was, 77 to 97, and only six were competitive. So with that little amount of competition and the fact that more of the seats are safe in the first place, the election as outcome is predetermined. Now, by competitive, we don't mean contested. About half the seats were actually contested, which is a good thing, right? But competition, you have to have it about the statistics we've looked at says that if your win percentage is 7 points or less, it's really competitive. Even if you made it 10, you don't get a lot that more competitive seats, right? So when you have a map that's designed for only seven competitive seats, there's not a lot of doubt about who's going to win that chamber. And the same, I had to show you a picture for the Senate, it looks the same, right? Now, what would a safe map look, or excuse me, what would a fair map look like? So we've done some work to understand what fair maps would look like. A fair map for the state house would have a slight Republican tilt. Okay, I know the Democrats don't want to hear that, but a map that would correctly represent Georgia's voting geography would have some safe Republican seats, some safe Democratic seats, but in the House there would be 15 competitive. With 15 competitive seats, guess what? The voters decide who wins. That's really what voters want. The number one thing when we poll voters about maps, they say we want competition, we want competitive elections. And it turns out that there's enough competitive territory in Georgia today. There's enough where you could draw a map that had 15 competitive seats in the House, and there would be about four in the Senate. There's a range here, but I'm just using central point numbers, right? So with 15 competitive seats, neither party would be guaranteed to win. And our view is that's how the maps ought to be drawn. The maps ought to be fair to both parties, and it's going to tilt slightly to the right. That's just the way life is. But it would have a lot more competition. So by eliminating competition, you've decided the outcome in advance. And so when you look at the way the map design was, 94 to 79, and the outcome was 77 to whatever, uh, the map is driving the outcome of the election. I mean, that's just, it's the unfortunate situations what we have. And we see this in the state Senate, we see it in the state House, and we also see it in our congressional map where, right, our congressional map was designed for 9 Republican seats, 5 Democratic seats. What's our delegation? 9-5. Okay, a fair map there would be 8-6 with one competitor. We don't have any competition really at the congressional level. Now, that's not to say people don't contest the seats. Don't get me wrong. Contesting seats is a good thing in our view. About half the state assembly seats get contested. That's good. But realistically, when the map is designed to virtually eliminate competition, the map has a huge say in who wins.
Yeah. I have a question from someone in the audience about do you anticipate any further action related to the legality of redistribution that was done for the 2024 election? What's going to happen in Georgia? Is there anything remaining? And anybody who has any insights on that, please let us know.
Yeah, I will say this, that the maps that were adjusted in 2023 were adjusted as a result of court orders, where the court ordered Georgia to add districts for black voters because the maps that were drawn in 21 violated the Voting Rights Act, right? So we added one congressional district for black voters. We added, I think it was 2 state Senate seats and like 5 state House seats, right? And so that's a good thing. It's the maps are now fair to voters of color. But when those districts were added, the legislature said, well, we don't want to lose our partisan advantage. So they took back other districts, right? And so the maps were essentially rebalanced to the unfair advantage that was built in the first place. But they are fair for black voters. Now the question is, are those gains for black voters at risk? Well, the answer is yes, and here's why. I know people aren't aware that there's this gerrymandering war going on. Texas, California, you mentioned it, Michael, at the beginning. I don't think there's a huge chance that Georgia will step up right now and try to muck with our congressional maps. The reason is that all 5 of the congressional districts that are currently held by Democrats are protected by the Voting Rights Act. They're all majority black districts. So if you tried to take one of those back, you'd be back in court in a heartbeat. I'm more concerned about what happens if people should know that the state is appealing the ruling that caused us to draw the maps for black voters in 2023. The state is appealing the ruling. Other states are doing the same thing. The Supreme Court will hear on October 15th a case from out of Louisiana where the Louisiana voters are saying, well, wait a minute, the state redrew our map to add a district for black voters in Louisiana. Some non-African American voters challenged that, saying, well, that's reverse discrimination. That shouldn't be necessary. So they're challenging the very heart of the Voting Rights Act, which says you need to draw districts for black voters where they are available to be drawn. And so the Supreme Court is going to hear that case. Now, depending on how the Supreme Court rules, what if they weaken that requirement or get rid of that requirement? Well, then Georgia could get back into the act. Weird things could happen. Really, some bad things could happen if the Supreme Court of the U.S. says, you know what? We don't need that Voting Rights Act anymore. That would be devastating to Georgia, devastating to many states. And in particular, I think I would fear map changes. But that ruling would probably not come down until late in the term in 26. Who I can't speculate how the court's going to go. But the fact that they're listening to the argument has me concerned.
Mhm. So I'm going to ask you a crystal ball question, completely unfair. And I ask you and I ask everyone because I just don't know what the answer is. I haven't found it yet. But looking at the nation and the efforts that may take place about redistricting, where does that leave us in 2026 in terms of the outcome of the House? Does anybody have a projection about how many seats could possibly be changed to secure a Republican versus not outcome in 26?
Well, there are people out there who are studying this question. I am not at Fair Districts, but there's a guy named Sam Wong from Princeton University who developed the Princeton Gerrymandering Project, now runs a new organization called Electoral Innovation Lab, who's looking at it, thinking that, did Texas go too far? Some of those districts going to backfire. The big prizes, as I understand it, are Texas and California. That's about 5 seats each. Missouri's going to do one probably. Illinois may do one back on the other side. New York is looking at it. There's a court case in Utah that's going to force a redraw there, but that's not related to this mid-decade war, but it's going to change something. Ohio has to go. I mean, you're talking about a handful of seats, right? First of all, what you should know is that the gerrymandering after the 2021 cycle is what got the current majority in the House. Experts looked at the maps after the 2021 cycle, and they're divided on this. But the experts we've talked to, we had a webinar on this with some of the national experts, said, probably about 4 to 5 seats were unfairly given to Republicans, one of which was ours in Georgia, by the way. One of those seats was a take back in Georgia. So we know that it happened. And if you look at the current House majority, it's only like 2 or 3. So the Republicans already hold an unfair majority, in our view, based on the gerrymandering from 21. So now if you wash again and you get 5 one way, 5 the other way, and then a couple others, how's it turn out? I don't think anybody has gamed it out to say, all right, I think the real possibility is 5 here, 3 here, 4 there. I'm not aware of anybody who's got a definitive scorecard. It smells like a wash right now, but it's hard to tell. It's really hard to crystal ball that any farther than, it's a game. And frankly, I'll just make one other editorial comment is that this whole thing is called mid-decade redistricting. You're redistricting without waiting for a census. There's no other thing compelling you to do it except somebody wants partisan gain. Georgia has had this problem since 2006. Our organization, frankly, wants to ban the practice. We are advocating that Georgia should take the lead and say this is unnecessary. We should ban the practice of mid-decade. It's not banned in Georgia, but it could be done with a simple law in our view. So we'd like to see that whole thing just stop dead in its tracks in Georgia and let the other states do what they're going to do, but it shouldn't happen anywhere.
Okay. We have some questions in the Q&A that pertain to things we've already talked about, but I didn't want to go any further without at least getting Daniel into the conversation, who's been waiting so patiently. Daniel, a question for you. Many on this call probably at least a little familiar with ranked choice voting, but how would you have them explain it to someone new to the concept, like their elevator pitch? What is it? Why is it?
Yeah. So it's pretty easy, actually, when you think about it. Ranked choice voting is about when you go to fill out your ballot, you're not selecting just one candidate, you're ranking your choices first, second, third, as many or as few as you like. And that's the simple process of it. Now, how does that have an impact? Well, it's essentially taking our runoff system that we have now, and it's a simple upgrade to it. Just like our runoff system has now, any candidate who doesn't get enough votes is eliminated, and anybody who voted for that candidate who's eliminated, your vote automatically transfers from your first choice to your second choice or to your next top choice. And so it's taking that runoff process and running it instantly. And with that, we can simplify our elections down into one election and eliminate the need for runoffs. And this delivers a number of benefits for voters and citizens. One, since we're simplifying this election process down to one election, it's just simpler. We can have our election results on election night with ranked choice voting. We don't have to wait 4 weeks to have the true results of the election. Because we're not running a second election, we save on a ton of administrative costs and overhead. We can cut the costs of elections down by about $75 million a year and return that to taxpayers. A great benefit of ranked choice voting, by giving voters more choice to rank their choices, politicians are encouraged to, if they can't be your first choice, they want to be your second choice. There's a incentive to turn down the temperature and turn down negative campaigning. And I know in this moment that we would all love to see the temperature being turned down more, and ranked choice voting can be a pressure in that direction to campaign more positively. And lastly, it's easier on voters. One, you're only having to go to one election. That's easier. But what we see is with the runoff process, there is a steep drop off in voter participation from the first election to the second election. What's happening is voters are showing up to the polls. They're doing their civic duty. They put their ballot in the ballot box. And if there's a runoff election, your votes are thrown in the trash can. And then you have to come back for your vote to count. And so we see this as issue with runoff election drop-off as a voter enfranchisement issue. And ranked choice voting helps protect your vote by ensuring that as long as you've got ranked choices on your ballot, your vote will automatically transfer and you get to maintain your participation in that election without having all the complexity of having to come back for a runoff vote. And so Ranked choice voting is about the simple process of ranking your choices 1, 2, 3, but it delivers a lot of benefits for voters and it delivers it across the spectrum. It's not a partisan issue. It's all about delivering better government, more choice for voters.
Yeah. So opponents of ranked choice voting will cite a couple of things. Typically, they will say it's way too confusing for voters, and they'll say it's biased against conservatives. I find the first one really interesting because in my mind, ranked choice voting is kind of like when you go to a restaurant and you pick something on the menu and they say, "I'm sorry, we're out of lasagna today, but we have penne alla vodka." Okay, I'll go with that. And I guess there are people who are just paralyzed by that and don't know what to do. But how do you address the argument that this is too confusing for the average voter, and there's bias inherent in it?
Well, the argument's not made in good faith. You're ranking your choices. It's easy. It's 1, 2, 3. It's used statewide in Maine and Alaska, and because of that, we have actually extensive research on the use of ranked choice voting and how voters engage with it. There's some great research from R Street Institute that has studied elections in Maine and found that it does not cause voter confusion. Voters do not have difficulty filling out the ballots, and they like it when they use it. Now, I understand where people are coming from when they make this criticism, because, like, I'll be honest, if someone comes to me and says, I want to change the election system, my first reaction is, whoa, hold on. Let's like, what's going on here? And I understand that hesitation. But the thing is, ranked choice voting has been used, it's been proven. It's not just theoretically sound, it's practically sound because it has been used, like I said, statewide in Maine and Alaska and in numerous cities all around the country, in the New York City Democratic mayoral primary. And the confusion argument just does not hold water, but I understand where people are coming from, and it's important that we do the voter education and that we reach people where they are to make sure that they understand it so that it is not something that's scary and mystical.
So one more question for you about this. So we know that the Republican majority, at least currently, has not been very supportive of it. What is the strategy? You're finding that more and more they're coming out with legislation or attempts at legislation to say no way, no how, never. What is Better Ballot Georgia doing?
Yeah, so there's several things to be said about this, and there's an aspect of your previous question that I didn't get to about the bias. There's this perceived liberal progressive bias with ranked choice voting. I think that just comes down to the natural predilections of progressives being more willing to explore changing systems, and conservatives, true to the name, are more conserved with making changes to things, and that inclination is understandable. There is no bias to ranked choice voting. It's all about majority rule and that whoever is elected has the majority support of voters. What we see is, I, I hope this doesn't upset anybody here, but I think that Marjorie Taylor Greene would still win her district if we had ranked choice voting, and that is what it is. But ranked choice voting does have a lot of benefits of the stuff that I said before. And it's the way I like to think about it is ranked choice voting is not a revolution. It's not a radical upheaval to our voting system. It is truly a simple upgrade improvement on the runoff process that we have. A few months ago, I had some problems with my wrist when I was working at the computer. Talked to my doctor about it, and she recommended a wrist pad to elevate my wrists. And the next day when I went into work, my wrist still hurt. But after a couple months, suddenly I realized, oh wait, that pain is gone. And in much the same way, ranked choice voting is not going to be an overnight change, but rather it's all about delivering majority rule for voters, candidates who have majority support, and that gradually provides us with a better government that is more responsive to what voters want. And it's in much the same way that wrist brace slowly heals pains that we have. And it delivers this for all voters. And then I want to push back a little bit on the framing that the Republican Party, as the majority in Georgia, is united in opposition to ranked choice voting. That's simply not the case. it was 2 years ago, there was House Bill 200 that was introduced and debated in committee that had bipartisan support of Republicans and Democrats in the state house. And I lost my train of thought here 1 second. So there was that bill that had bipartisan support, and the implementation of ranked choice voting for military and overseas voters actually came out of a Republican supported bill several years ago. And that was included as a way to make our election system more efficient. That lowered the time it takes for runoffs from 9 weeks to 4 weeks. That makes it easier for all of us. If we use ranked choice voting, we could condense that down to 0 weeks and have our results on election night. So as I've worked on this project, it's been incredibly rewarding. And as I've gotten to know the legislative process in Georgia, it's full of people who are genuinely working on trying to have a well-functioning state, and full of people who genuinely care and are trying to do good. And I think when we come at it from that perspective, that opens more doors for us to know that you can work with people. This is possible to do in a bipartisan way, and it's possible to do in a bipartisan way. And I think we need to keep that kind of framing on it and keep our minds open and work together.
Okay, thank you.
Can I add just one thing?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, the reason that Republicans changed overseas voters to ranked choice voting after the 2020 election wasn't because of a Republican love for the idea of ranked choice voting. There was an ulterior motive there, which was to close the registration period between a general election and a runoff election. There was a belief that after the 2020 election, there were lots of people in Georgia who went and registered for the first time and then were able to vote for Jon Ossoff in that runoff, bringing him a victory. And so by moving the UOCAVA voters, the overseas voters, to ranked choice voting, they were able to move up that election, that runoff election. And in moving up the runoff election, they were able to close the window during which people would be able to register to vote. So, I don't want to be picky, but I do just I want to push back on the idea that Republicans allowed UOCAVA voters to vote ranked choice because of some love for ranked choice voting.
What I think it demonstrates, and thank you for adding that. That's an important detail. But what I think it demonstrates, which is nice about it, is that ranked choice voting is well suited for our system. It plugs into what we have currently and improves it. There can be multiple reasons, like Representative Draper pointed out for that, but it's a great thing to show that with using this, we were able to shorten our elections and make them more efficient. And our overseas voters get to use the system, and that it plugs in well to our runoff system. And if we were to implement it statewide for all elections, that would be even better benefit and could be combined with, better resources to help with voter registration and help maintain voter registration accessibility and not tamp down on that.
So I'm going to be mindful of the time and have a question that's been on the list for a good 25 minutes now that I think was intended for Charlie Bailey. So I got to pitch it to you. And I got to say that I love this question that is coming from a DeKalb Democrat. The question for you, sir, is what is the plan to activate rural voters to understand the negative impact Republican legislators have on their daily lives? And I'll just say that there is a feeling in DeKalb that what can we do to help? We need to also help our fellow Democrats in rural areas. What can we do there? It's definitely not an area that we're as familiar with.
Well, it's a fantastic question. And I would say we are doing three things that are directly on point. One is with our more is more communication strategy. I've personally, since I've been chair, given at this point over 55 interviews, press conferences, and with TV, radio, podcasts, newspapers. And that's all over the state. We did recently a trip to the coast where we got 7 different stories in 7 different county weekly papers in very rural areas. And the message I brought was the message, as long as I'm chair, that we're going to be hammering until we take back power from these Republicans and take it back for working folks in this state. And that is 22 years of Republican rule has resulted in the American dream being less attainable now than it was 22 years ago when they took power. And the policies and the consequences of their rule has direct impacts. We're seeing Claxton, Georgia. They're having to cut services at the hospital there. Senator Warnock recently went down there and pointed that out because of the big billionaire bill. Already, even before the passage of that, 18 of the 22 rural hospitals were at risk of closure. And now you see up in Livonia at St. Mary's, they're closing their labor and delivery unit. You got to go down 441 to Athens if you got to have a baby. I mean, what is this, 2025 and 1925? We have to, as a party, and I will, as chair, continue to push that message year round. Candidates only have a certain amount of time with which they can push a message. I know that, having been one. As chair of the party, I can hammer these Republicans 365 days out of the year. We're going to continue doing that. Secondly, we're building a year-round organizing program. We've never had that in Georgia out of the state party. And that's not just for DeKalb. And there's county parties like DeKalb that are really good setups. Y'all got like precinct captains and all that. But in a lot of our places in the rural parts of the state, we don't have that. We are building that. Now, that is not an overnight thing. That is not a flip the switch thing. That takes time, but you got to start somewhere. And we're using the PSC race as a dry run to do that. So tonight, I think right now, the state party is running our regular Thursday night organizing lead call, where you can get the training to do the canvassing for the PSC. And wherever you are in the state, we're going to get you the lit that we have paid for, which, by the way, signifies the first time the state party has ever invested in a PSC race. And we're going to get that to you. We're also running phone banks Mondays and Wednesdays, every Monday and Wednesday until the election in November. And a big part of the building out, we can give y'all stuff in DeKalb and y'all going to take care of it. We don't have to do, and there's other county parties like y'all, but we're doing the work now to build up that year-round organizing effort so that we're not building it, on the runway next year when we got to reelect John to the U.S. Senate and we got to get a Democratic governor elected. So that's the second thing we're doing. The third thing we're doing to address the rural issue is we're going to directly invest in state legislative races also for the first time in 20 years. We put up TV ads in the Deborah Shigley race, the one that just happened on Tuesday. And Deborah gets all the credit on running a great race, 11-point overperformance on what happened in 2024. That investment represented the first investment in 20 years. We are going to continue that in targeted races around the state, including in Gerald Green's district in the far southwest Georgia. And people say, well, Gerald's been there forever and we can't get him, even though Biden won that district with 54%. VP Harris won it with 52%. And I tell them, yeah, well, if we ever put TV ads up on those folks' televisions and digital ads on their phones and mail pieces to tell them that because of what Gerald has done, 3 hospitals have closed in that district since he has been in office, the response is, well, we haven't done that. So my response to that is, well, I guess we haven't tested the theory. With me as chair, I promise you this, we're going to test the theory. And I can't guarantee you we're going to win every race we get involved in, but we're going to win more than we lose. And even the ones we lose, they're going to have to walk over broken glass to get those races from us. So the answer to the question is we're going to engage in the fight. And if we lose races, it won't be because we did not tell the voters exactly what the Republicans have been doing with their tax dollars. We're going to make sure they know the case.
Thank you, sir. All right. Well, I'm going to wrap things up by asking one more question. It's going to be for everybody to answer in their own way. If you could just pick one thing to ask the folks on the call to do that would help ensure free and fair elections, that would help preserve our democracy, what are those things in top of mind that you would recommend you do? And I'm going to start with Representative Draper. If you could just give us some advice about what would be helpful. Oh, I think you're on mute still.
Sorry, what was the question?
If you could pick one thing to ask of us, the folks on this call, your fellow, DeKalb citizens, what they could do to help with voting and in Georgia in this year, whether it's going to the Blue Ribbon Commission meetings or anything else,
No.
what would you like to see us do to help?
Yes. So first of all, I know the people I know so many of the names on this call. These are people who are well versed in all these issues, and thank you for your enthusiasm for this topic and your persistence in this topic, because we need those voices. And especially if you've ever been to a state election board meeting, or if you've been to one of these blue ribbon committee meetings, you see the other side. They are there in droves, and they are loud, and they are applying a lot of pressure. So we have to have a counter force. And many of you are that counter force. So thank you. I think we have a really interesting, I've already alluded to this, but we have an interesting opportunity with this report that's coming out of this Blue Ribbon Committee. And so as the Blue Ribbon Committee's work winds down and we transition to writing this report, I need all of y'all to help, talk to the people on this committee, whether email, phone calls, go visit them in their office, whatever it is. And we need to define what pieces of legislation are going to be proposed in this report. We don't want the stuff. They started this committee by saying they only wanted to move forward with pieces of legislation that were backed by evidence, evidence-based, fact-based. And so let's hold them to that. If they go out there and they say, we want to propose, getting out of ERIC, well, there's lots of evidence that is counter to that. So we need to point that out. I want to hold their feet to the fire. When they say they want it to be evidence-based, we need to insist that the proposals that come out of this committee are evidence-based. So I need your help with that.
Okay. Ken, what would you ask of the participants today?
I think that, as we enter another big election season coming up, right? I'm talking about really next year. I think that, you know, free, fair, and secure elections are really critical to governing the state of Georgia, right? We know that elections could be more competitive with fairer maps. We know that to all the work that Representative Draper is doing on the commission and so on, voters need to make it clear to their candidates that this is one of their top issues. People vote for all different manner of reasons, but they have to express to their representatives, to their candidates, that they want these changes. Things they want the free and fair conduct of the elections, and in our particular case, I'll just put a plug for Fair Maps, that you want reforming redistricting, you want to stop gerrymandering in Georgia. You have to tell your representatives that it's an issue to you. I have brought it up to candidates in my area, and they go, "Well, no one else except you is talking to me." And I said, "Well, I'm talking to you, and I'm a voter, okay?" But if they don't hear it from you, they don't know. They don't know how important it is to you. So you have to make it clear to your candidates. You go to their events next year, or this coming up, you make it clear to your candidates that this is important to me, that I want free, fair, and secure elections in Georgia. And it means these things. It means fair maps. It means, all the right conduct of the elections, et cetera. So let your representatives and your candidates know that it's top of mind.
All right. Daniel Baggerman.
I just want to echo what Ken just said, because it's right on the money, hitting the nail on the head. And then I'll add, specifically for Better Ballot Georgia, we're currently working on a 2025 municipal election voter guide that will help voters understand where their municipal election candidates stand on ranked choice voting. So if you follow us, you can keep informed about that and share that, and that'll be coming up here in October. But also, to address your question more broadly, that in these times that we're in, when having free, fair, and secure elections, are really important to defend, there are places in our lives where we've grown accustomed to not talking about politics, where it's become taboo. But I would maybe encourage you to consider or reconsider how you how and when you bring up politics in certain circles, and that, that it can be important to keep these issues top of mind for people who are in your life, in your social circles, that when it's important to defend free and fair elections, that that we keep it top of mind, and that it's not forgotten, or with all the other rush of news that's going on. And these are very important issues, and always be respectful, but sometimes it's important when it comes to especially elections, which is our most important democratic institution, that we're willing to talk openly about it, and especially when things are not being done fair.
Outstanding. And Charlie Bailey, the last word, please, sir.
Well, I respect so much. Thank you, Mike, and DeKalb Democrats for having us, and I respect my my nonpartisan brothers on the call. I will be the partisan here, and I will say there is one party in the country right now that gives a damn about an egalitarian society and a rule of law and working people. And if we're going to get fair maps, which we need to get, fair voting practices, which we need to get, the only way we're going to get that is by getting power. That's it. And that means we got to win elections. And I'll tell you that the entity that is going to do the most in this state to take back power in the state house and the state senate and statewide is the Georgia Democratic Party. And so if you're not a member of your county party, sign up and be a member. Go to georgiademocrat.org and sign up with us. And you don't have to wait till next year. I mentioned it before, but lean in these PSC races now. There are things that you can do now. I don't know what Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer are going to do. They don't check in with me. But I know what we can do in Georgia now, and that is get on the phone, call people, tell them that they can actually vote on how high their power bill is going to be this November. So volunteer with us. Give us your time. If you haven't gotten a ticket for the Carter Lewis dinner, which is a week from tomorrow, we'll have both our senators speaking and Governor J.B. Pritzker as our keynote. Make sure you go to our social media pages. There's links there. Get your ticket and come to the biggest Democratic event of the year in downtown.
Thank you, sir. Well, I will just sum it up with a couple of take-home messages. There are so many issues, and we didn't scratch the surface on many of them, but we addressed quite a few. I would encourage people who are interested in becoming a poll worker or poll watcher to do so, to participate in voter registration efforts, to speak up and show up at hearings and community forums, to support groups that advocate for issues that you support, including groups that like the ones that you heard here. Want to let you know that our next DeKalb Dems webinar in October is it a work in progress, but likely cover the housing crisis in DeKalb in Georgia. We have multiple Meet the Candidate forums coming up on October 1st, 8th, and 11th, all in Mobilize. Our next monthly meeting is October 2nd. And remember that the last day to register to vote is October 6th. Finally, I want to thank the person who's behind the scenes tonight. Paula Anderson is the wizard behind the curtains who makes this all happen seamlessly. It makes it look easy. And she's been doing it for years with us. She has been a priceless part of our volunteer effort at DeKalb Dems. Thank you so much, Paula. I appreciate you. And I appreciate everybody that tuned in tonight. We will have this recording up on our YouTube channel shortly. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, DeKalb Dems.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.